Welcome back to the Christopher Valentine Show. With us is Dr. Christian von Lahr, who is the star of his own television show called Messenger. And Christian, what is the name of your website?
Messengerontv.com. Come and join us because we have a special guest, and I'd love to have you on the show. And of course, we're trying to bring a lot of this wisdom that we're speaking of today to the general populace.
Messengerontv.com.
That's right.
Okay, so back to mystical beings, and I want to talk about giants because they seem to go back, and a lot of information has been coming forth in the news lately about giants, and they're finding these giant bones in the desert and different areas of the world. Is that real giants?
Some of those are true and some are not. A lot of the stories today actually are not true, but yet there has been recorded history of this for some time, especially in Mesopotamia, which would be Persia, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. Isn't it interesting that's where the Iraqi war was, you know? And we have all this religious background, potential influence on things like global war and things. But I'm going to say that there could be a reason why that could be so. Because underneath that ground, underneath those sand, there's caves. And it's been written a long time ago, that there are bones back there, down there of giants, and all sorts of other proof of all these things we consider to be religious artifacts and religious fact. We're going to find it down there. So that's why they would want that area. Remember, Mesopotamia is the oldest area. It's the Sumerian culture where we get all of our text, all of our art, art of all writing. This is the oldest culture, 40,000 years. We think of it as 6 to 10 because scientists tend to look at recorded history, and by records they simply mean the transactions. I sold this goat to you. But we were recording things long before that, and we were also recording in stone, not just art, cave drawings and things of that nature.
So these could be actual giant bones that are...
What I wanted to go there, I wanted to say that those old stories were actually talking about giants even back then. Now, there's two ways to approach the subject of giants. Humans, when we were in the last race of life, we're all an Indo class of life now, Indonesian, Indo this, Indo that. But that whole last race of life was Atlantean. Everybody, everywhere in the distant past was Atlantean. And before that, long before that, everybody was Lemurian. So the whole world was Lemurian at one time, the whole world was Atlantean. But in Atlantean times, we were somewhat diaphanous. We weren't nearly as solid as we were now. And we eventually, towards the end of that evolution, became more dense. Now, keep in mind that back then when you are Atlantean, if I'm semi-translucent, so is everybody else. You're not going to notice the difference, right? So this is why it's so hard to find those bones. But in the later stages, we started getting dense form, which is why they preceded this race. So there's proof. But because they're more diaphanous, because they're not as dense as we are, the people were going to be gigantic.
Ah, okay.
So the truer stories, and if you go back far enough, you find many proofs of this, that the Atlantic people were extremely tall. They could be 14 foot tall. It took a while for us to get down to this size. Now, 40,000 years ago in the Sumerian text, they're talking about giants coming into being and sort of the first man. This fits into the biblical stories, by the way, because those different atoms that we had, different Adam and Eve, one of those atoms was Lemurian life. The other one was astral, which was Atlantis. Okay, Atlantean. We were actually born in the astral plane, and only in the end did we start becoming dense. And long before that, when we were Lemurian, we were in the upper astral, so we were very diaphanous.
So this is when Atlanteans were just becoming more dense.
Well, the density of Atlanteans occurred pretty much at the end of that civilization, when all the continents started coming back together and colliding again. This Pangaea, or technically it was Atlantis. But a lot of the stories of giants occurred there, but they were speaking of other kinds of giants too. The nature spirits speak of giants in a different way. And we can correlate these stories. Underneath the earth, we were needing giants to hold up the earth because we have all these volcanic rushes of lava going through it, and the earth hadn't quite taken its form. And so they were kind of nature spirits that were giant also. Just consider them more diaphanous, trying to hold up the earth and the plates and things of that nature. So this is why they actually had a function. And eventually, these giants, laboring so long, so selflessly, keeping that crust up, eventually started solidifying because they wouldn't change, and things were growing over them, and calcification set in. And so they literally are those formations now that you see deep under the ground holding up these great caves.
So are these the same giants that we're talking about with the Atlanteans?
No, they're a different kind. That's what I'm saying. There were two ways to approach that story, but yet there would be a connection to the two. But the nature spirits often speak of the ones that were being underground. For example, gnomes, we only think of the gnomes and nature spirits, the kind we have on our book covers and on the Travelocity commercials, and we see running around with the hats. But there are many classes of gnomes. Many of them work underground, and you would never see them. And they're so far down, they're working in such a basic nature and structure that we couldn't relate to them anyway. Yeah. This is why we say there are 6,000 kinds of nature spirits and nature people.
Well, in the book, I know that the nature spirits and the gnomes talk about going down and deep into the earth to visit the giants, and it's kind of heartwarming because the giants are laboring and holding up the earth for such a long time. They're not moving. There's so much on their backs, so to speak, and the gnomes like to go down there every 6 months and bring them some gems and help them to feel better. And
as I recall, they were even saying when all those liquefied, hot,
or the other way, the gems become
chemicals that became gems, right? When they solidify, there were actually tears, they were saying, dripping from the eyes of the giants, and those became a lot of those crystals in that we have.
I think that was the green one, which was.
And remember that a lot of their stories fit into the current thinking too. Like they indicate that geodes were actually the eggs of dragons.
They didn't. I think they didn't actually specifically say that, but you got that, and you were like, "What if I cracked open a geode? Would a dragon come out?" So it was like they're giving that information.
So what are geodes? They're like trapped hot gases under volcanoes and things.
Like a baby
so it fits into that wisdom.
Yeah, that was amazing that you were able to figure that out.
Now we speak of things like Pegasus and flying horses. People say, okay, now I'm leaving you there, Christian. It can't possibly be true. Well, of course it's true. It's not in the physical, it's in the etheric realm, which isn't constrained by the laws of physical density. Okay? This is why they can change their shape. Of course things are going to fly there. It's natural. It's easy to do. They're not constrained to the gravity and sciences that we have. But things are prolific. Look at the plants and animals on the earth. Any possible way that life can exist in any form, it will. The same thing is true in the nature kingdom, in the etheric worlds, in other words. Of course things fly. That works for them.
Well, we talk about flying elephants, we talk about Pegasus, and centaurs are also mentioned in the book. And this is another type of wisdom being. It seems like all of the mystical beings that are wrought forth by the nature spirits are mystical. And the centaur really has a special function in that it helps us and those people that want to travel out in their consciousness or even become spirit travelers, which we are destined to become after we leave this planet and other planets and voyage out from the solar system, which is information that the leprechauns give us in the book, the magical powers and mystical beings.
Do we want to talk about that when we come back, or should I go into that one now?
Well, let's see. I think we better save the centaurs for the next segment because we might want to cover a little bit more. So when we come back, more on mystical beings with our special guest, Dr. Christian von Lahr.